My daughter-in-law changed the locks on my house, and then she took her family on a trip to Hawaii, all while I, at 66 years old, was trying to find some semblance of sleep, curled up in my own car, right in my own driveway. Not a single text answered. Not one call returned. Just silence from my son and his wife. The next morning, I walked over to the trash cans on the side of the house, and there it was, the small wooden box, handmade by my late husband, just sitting there on a pile of eggshells and coffee grounds. Right then and there, I knew. It wasn't just the key that no longer fit. It was my whole life, my place in this family, that they were trying to throw away. They could toss a wooden box. They could change a lock. But the memories, those are mine. This house, this is mine. And their little vacation, well, it was about to be cut short. My name is Eleanor Vance, and at 66 years young, I live in the peaceful town of Ashland, Oregon. If this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to listen to more meaningful life stories with us. Your support is our biggest motivation to keep sharing. My garden has always been a place where time stands still. Not in a sad way, mind you, but in a way that feels cherished. Here, among the heirloom roses that my husband, Richard, planted with his own 2 hands, I can feel the rhythm of a lifetime. This morning was no different. The crisp Ashland, Oregon air carried the early morning mist, cool against my cheeks as I knelt, my bare fingers sinking into the damp earth. The soil never lies. It remembers every footprint, every season of sun and rain, every bit of effort, and every drop of sweat. Richard used to say that, and I believe him. Every rose bush is a chapter in our story. Over there is the peace rose, with its creamy petals tinged with the softest pink. It was his gift to me after our first big fight, an apology that needed no words. A little further on is the Mr. Lincoln, deep and velvety red, standing proud. He planted that one the year Michael, our only son, was born as strong and brilliant as a new father's hope. But the ones dearest to my heart are still the climbing roses that weave their way through the wooden fence at the back of the property. He named them Eleanor's Legacy. He said they were like me, delicate on the outside but with deep, tenacious roots, quietly offering their beauty to the world. It's been 12 years since he passed, taken by a sudden heart attack right in his favorite armchair, but those roses are still here. They still bloom every summer, a faithful promise that outlasts even death. This house, with its oak floors that creak with every familiar footstep and the faint scent of old books mingling with cinnamon from the kitchen, is a part of my very being. We bought it back in 1980, when it was just a small house for $95,000 and a great big dream. Together, we painted every wall, laid every stone on the back patio, and filled it with laughter, arguments, and quiet understanding. Every scratch on the windowsill, every faint stain on the wall is a memory. This place isn't just property, it's the soul of my family, of my nearly 40-year marriage. And now, it is my sanctuary. That peace began to crack one Tuesday afternoon with a phone call. "Mom, it's me." Michael's voice came through the line, laced with a tension he tried to hide behind a rushed tone. I was sitting in Richard's armchair, a novel in my lap, but my mind was elsewhere. "Michael's son, what's wrong? You sound tired." He hesitated for a moment. "Everything's fine, Mom. It's just, work's been a little tough lately. I'm in a career reshaping phase." Reshaping, one of their generation's new words, a gentle way of saying the hard truth that his architecture firm had just gone through major layoffs. I knew because I'd read about it in the local paper. And Jessica, his wife, a woman who prided herself on being a personal brand optimization specialist, had also just seen her latest startup fail. I didn't press him on it. I knew Michael had a strong sense of pride, just like his father. "Jessica and we just need a little time to get our feet back under us. Our lease is up, and I was wondering, would it be okay if we came and stayed with you for a little while? Just a few months, until I land a new project." A brief silence hung in the air. The mother in me immediately said, "Of course, son. My house is always your house." But another part of me, a gut feeling I'd been ignoring for years, felt a vague sense of unease. The problem wasn't Michael. The problem was Jessica. I remember the first time Michael brought her home for Thanksgiving, clear as day. Jessica was sharp, beautiful, with sleek black hair and an expensive outfit that screamed success. She was a smooth talker, but her eyes told a different story. As she looked around my home, her gaze wasn't filled with the warmth or curiosity of a future daughter-in-law, but with the cold, calculating assessment of an appraiser. "This house has fantastic bones," she'd said, a smile on her lips but not in her eyes. "So much potential, if it were modernized a bit." Richard, who was still with us then, had given a small shake of his head and a meaningful look in my direction. He never did like people who used the word potential to describe things that were already whole in their own right. But I pushed my feelings aside, telling myself I was just being an old-fashioned mother-in-law. I welcomed Jessica into the family, hoping Michael's love would soften her sharp edges. Hope, sometimes, is a sweet trap. And now, here they were, on my doorstep. Their glossy black Audi looked completely out of place on my old gravel driveway. Michael looked tired and a little ashamed, avoiding my eyes. Jessica, on the other hand, was as polished as ever. She stepped out of the car, pulling 2 enormous suitcases behind her, and flashed a brilliant smile. "Mom, Eleanor, thank you so much. You're a real lifesaver." She gave me a quick, chilly embrace that smelled of expensive Chanel perfume, a scent too loud and foreign for my familiar home. The first few days passed in a carefully disguised awkwardness. I had prepared the guest room, put on fresh linens, and placed a vase of lavender on the nightstand. But after just one night, Jessica had moved the vase. "I'm a little sensitive to scents, Mom," she said, her voice light as air. "Besides, it doesn't really fit the minimalist aesthetic I'm going for." My house began to be invaded, slowly, under the guise of help and improvement. One morning, I walked into the kitchen to find that my entire collection of ceramic spice jars, which I'd gathered over 30 years, had been replaced by a neat row of identical glass containers with clean, soulless, sans serif labels. "I helped you organize a bit to tidy things up," Jessica announced, a label maker in her hand. "This looks so much more organized, don't you think?" All I could do was smile and thank her. What was I supposed to say? That I loved the cozy chaos of my mismatched jars? That I could find the cinnamon with my eyes closed just by feeling the small chip on the rim? Michael stood beside her, saw the look on my face, and just gave my shoulder a light pat. "She means well, Mom." Jessica's good intentions spread throughout the house. Richard's jazz collection was packed into a cardboard box and moved to the attic to free up space for the smart speaker system. The books I was in the middle of reading on the coffee table were stacked neatly in a corner, to avoid clutter. She even suggested replacing the floral curtains I had sewn myself with gray roller blinds. "Neutrals will make the room feel bigger, Mom. It's what's trending." I felt like a tourist in my own home, a caretaker in a space that no longer belonged to me. I started spending more and more time in the garden, the one place Jessica seemed to have no interest in. Out there, I was still the master of my own world, but every time I stepped back inside, I had to take a deep breath to brace myself for some new change. Michael, my son, either didn't notice or chose not to notice my suffocation. He was lost in his own problems, buried in his laptop day after day, trying to find new projects, hoping to salvage his sinking career. Every time I tried to talk to him, his answers were distracted. "Michael, does the living room feel a little different to you?" I asked, looking at the empty wall where Richard's favorite oil painting of the Oregon coast used to hang. "Oh," Jessica said, "it needed a more open feel to spark creativity." "It looks okay, Mom, very modern." He said it without even looking up from his screen. I didn't argue. I stayed quiet. My silence, I realized later, was my permission. I let them, or rather, I let her, slowly erase the traces of me, of Richard, from this house. I had turned myself into a ghost in my own legacy. The event that set everything in motion came on a Monday morning when the phone rang. It was the daughter of Susan, my best friend from college, who lived down in Austin, Texas. Her voice was panicked. "Aunt Eleanor, Mom just had to have emergency hip surgery. The doctor said it went well, but she's going to need someone to look after her for at least the first week. I can't get off work. I don't know what to do." Without a second's hesitation, I replied, "I'm on my way. Book me a ticket. I'll take the first flight I can get." Susan was my family. We had walked through the wild years of our youth and the hardest times of our lives together. When Richard died, Susan dropped everything and drove for 3 days straight to be by my side. Now, it was my turn to be there for her. When I hung up and announced my trip, I saw a flicker of something in Jessica's eyes. It was gone in a flash, but I saw it. It was relief, and maybe triumph. "Oh, you absolutely have to go," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Don't you worry about a thing here. You go take care of Aunt Susan. Michael and I have everything under control." Michael nodded in agreement. "That's right, Mom. Don't worry about us. We'll take good care of the house." I started packing. A strange sense of unease churned inside me, a bad feeling I couldn't quite name. I walked through the house, touching familiar objects like I was saying goodbye. I lingered in the garden for a long time. I looked at the rosebuds, waiting to bloom, and whispered to Richard that I had to go away for a little while. Before I left for the airport, I pulled Michael aside. I looked him straight in the eye, trying to find the little boy I once knew. "Michael, promise me one thing." "Yeah, Mom. You can forget everything else, but don't forget to water your father's roses. They're important to me, and they were important to him." He seemed a little impatient, his thumb still scrolling on his phone. Yeah, I know, Mom. I'll remember. You have a safe trip." He gave me a quick hug and turned away. That hug, just like Jessica's, was missing warmth. As the taxi pulled away, and I looked back at my beloved home through the window, I had no idea it was the last time I would see it as my own. The flight from Austin back to Portland was nearly 4 hours long, but my mind had already traveled miles ahead. Racing through the gray clouds back to my house in Ashland, the week with Susan had been both a duty and a relief. I took care of my friend, read her old books, and we reminisced and laughed more than I had in months. But beneath the peace of fulfilling a friend's duty was a dull anxiety, a sense of unease about the place I called home. It was no longer a place of absolute peace. It had become a contested territory, and I, ironically, was the one losing ground. The taxi dropped me off at the end of my familiar street as the clock on the dashboard read 10 o'clock at night. The pale yellow streetlights cast long shadows of the old maple trees onto the damp pavement, creating a scene so quiet it broke your heart. I pulled my small suitcase, my feet moving over a sidewalk where I could feel every crack with my eyes closed. I was bone-tired, dreaming only of a hot bath, a cup of chamomile tea, and sinking into my familiar bed, where the mattress knew my every curve. The house appeared in the darkness, silent and solid. The porch light that Richard and I had installed 20 years ago still turned on automatically, casting a warm glow on the oak front door. I smiled. At least one thing was still the same. I fumbled in my purse, my cold fingers brushing against the familiar piece of metal. The house key. A tiny object that held a whole world of affirmation. I belong here, and this place belongs to me. I put the key in the lock. A dry clink. Not the smooth sound of a lock turning, but the harsh sound of metal hitting metal, a flat-out rejection. My heart skipped a beat. I must be tired, my hands shaking. I took a deep breath and carefully inserted the key again. This time, I could feel it clearly. It wouldn't go all the way in. Something was different. I bent down for a closer look. In the yellow light, the lock looked brand new. It wasn't the old brass lock, aged over the years, with the little scratches around the edge I knew so well. This was a shiny, silver lock, cold and utterly foreign. A chill that had nothing to do with the weather ran down my spine. "No way," I whispered. "There has to be a mistake. Maybe there was an attempted break-in, and Michael had to change the lock in an emergency for safety." A flicker of hope. But why wouldn't he have called me? I rang the doorbell. The familiar chime rang out and then died, swallowed by the thick silence inside. No footsteps, no lights flicking on. The house was as dark as an empty shell. I rang it again, holding it down longer this time, a desperate plea. Still, only silence answered. Confusion began to curdle into a vague fear. I pulled out my phone, the bright screen momentarily blinding me. I dialed Michael. Each ring felt like an eternity. 1, 2, 3, and then his cheerful, pre-recorded voice. "Hey, you've reached Michael. I can't get to the phone right now." I hung up immediately, feeling like I'd had a bucket of ice water thrown in my face. I called Jessica. The same result. Her professional, cold voice on the voicemail felt like mockery. They weren't home. They had changed the lock, and they hadn't said a single word to me. The scattered pieces started snapping together into a terrifying picture in my mind. Jessica's assessing gaze, her talk of modernizing, Michael's indifference, and that flash of triumph in my daughter-in-law's eyes when she heard I was leaving. This wasn't a mistake. This was a plan. I stood frozen on my own porch, feeling like a beggar being turned away. What was I supposed to do now? Knock on my neighbor's door in the middle of the night? Call the police with an unbelievable story about being locked out by my own son? Go to a hotel? My pride wouldn't let me. I couldn't let outsiders see this humiliating failure, the failure of a mother. With no other choice, I walked back to my old 2005 Honda Civic, the car Richard had bought for me and that I'd kept in perfect condition. I opened the back door, shoved my suitcase in, and sat in the driver's seat. The cramped, cold space enveloped me. The seat wouldn't recline all the way. I huddled in my coat, trying to find a position that was bearable. The air in the car was a mix of old paper from the books I kept in the back and the faint smell of coffee from the paper cup I'd had on the way from the airport. That was the longest night of my life. I couldn't sleep. I just stared at my house through the fogged-up windshield. The porch light that Richard and I had installed together one fall afternoon now seemed to be broadcasting my misery to the whole world. I could see the silhouettes of the Eleanor's Legacy roses swaying gently in the wind. They were still there, loyal and patient. Only people change. Memories flooded back, not the sweet ones, but memories as sharp as a knife. I remembered carrying Michael, a tiny, red-faced newborn, across that threshold for the first time. Richard had followed behind, carrying the diaper bag, a huge smile on his face. "Welcome home, you two," he'd said. I remembered Christmas Eves, huddled by the fireplace, the smell of gingerbread cookies filling the air. I remembered the times Michael was sick, and I'd stayed up all night, my hand on his forehead, worrying over his every breath. All of my love, all of my sacrifice, had led to this? A night spent shivering in a car, treated like a stranger. Humiliation washed over me like a tidal wave, drowning me. I was 66 years old. My joints were starting to ache whenever the weather turned. I should have been in a warm bed, under a soft comforter, not sitting here, in this old car, feeling the cold wind seep through the door seals. I didn't cry. The tears seemed to have frozen in my chest, turning into a cold, hard block of disappointment and pain. The sun rose, painting the eastern sky pink. The morning light brought no warmth. It only made my situation more stark and pathetic. My body was stiff and sore. I glanced in the rearview mirror and flinched. The woman staring back had tangled hair, deep-set, dark-circled eyes, and a face gaunt from a sleepless night. I didn't recognize her. With one last shred of hope, I picked up my phone and called Michael again. Still voicemail. I gritted my teeth and called Jessica. Still that dismissive silence. The last bit of hope died. Just then, I saw a familiar figure. Mrs. Carroll, my next-door neighbor of 20 years, was out walking her little terrier, Muffin. She waved at me, her usual kind smile on her face. I took a breath, trying to keep my voice from shaking, and got out of the car. "Eleanor, welcome back," Mrs. Carroll said cheerfully, as Muffin sniffed around my feet. "I thought you were gone for a few more days. How was your trip?" "It was fine, Carol. Thanks for asking," I replied, forcing a smile. She looked at me with concern. "You look exhausted." Must be the long flight. Then, with the innocence of someone who had no idea, she added, "I have to say Michael and Jessica have so much energy. They had people in here all week, fixing things up, painting, so much noise. And then yesterday, they flew off to Hawaii for a vacation, said they needed a break after all that hard work." Every word from Mrs. Carroll was like a hammer blow to my heart. Vacation? Hawaii? Renovations? Everything I had suspected, all of my worst fears, were true. They didn't just change the lock. They had planned it all. They had waited for me to leave, to turn my house into their house. And then they went on vacation, leaving me out here like a piece of old, discarded furniture. I don't know what I said to end the conversation with Mrs. Carroll. My mind was a complete blank. After she left, I started walking around the house, no longer a homeowner returning, but a thief casing the joint. This time, in the daylight, I could see everything clearly through the windows. The scene inside took my breath away. The living room was completely transformed. The floral sofa that Richard and I had picked out together, where we'd watched countless movies, was gone. In its place was a cold, gray leather sectional that looked like it belonged in a law office. The oil painting of the Oregon coast that Richard loved had been taken down, leaving a stark white wall. On the glass coffee table, there were no stacks of my books, just a few magazines on interior design. I moved to the dining room window. The antique oak table, the witness to so many family meals, was still there, but the chairs had been replaced with modern metal ones. The crystal chandelier my mother had left me was also gone. The destruction wasn't just about the furniture. They were trying to erase every memory, every trace of my and Richard's existence. They wanted a new, clean space with no past. And then, my eyes fell on the trash cans by the side of the house, ready for the morning garbage pickup. A new wave of dread washed over me. I walked closer, my heart pounding. I didn't want to look, but I had to. Lying right on top of the trash bags, stained with coffee grounds and eggshells, was a familiar object, the small walnut wood box with its beautiful grain and delicately rounded corners. It was the gift Richard had made for me with his own hands for our 20th wedding anniversary. He had spent a whole month in his little workshop out back to finish it. Inside that box was my mother's entire legacy to me, her handwritten recipes on cards that had yellowed with time. The recipe for her famous apple pie, for the roast chicken that Michael used to love as a boy. It wasn't just a box. It was my husband's love. It was my mother's memory. It was the thread connecting the generations. And now, it was in the trash. In that moment, the block of ice in my chest shattered, but it didn't melt into tears. It broke into the sharp shards of a cold, hard rage, a steely resolve I never knew I possessed. The pain was still there, but it was overshadowed by a new, more powerful emotion. It was the feeling of my dignity being trampled. I was no longer Eleanor Vance, the weak mother, the pitiful widow. I was the owner of this house, the heir to these memories, and I was going to take back everything that was mine. I turned away, not even bothering to pick the box out of the trash. I would come back for it later. Right now, I had more important things to do. I walked back to my car, my posture straight and steady. My hands were no longer shaking. I pulled out my phone. The silence in my old Honda was no longer the silence of loneliness and despair. It had become the quiet before a storm. I sat up straight in the driver's seat, my dry eyes fixed on the house that had rejected me. The image of the walnut box in the trash played over and over in my mind, like a haunting film, not to wallow in the pain, but to forge my resolve into steel. A mother's love can be forgiving and patient, but a person's self-respect has its limits. And they, Michael and Jessica, had crossed that line. I stopped thinking about why they had done it. That question had become meaningless. What mattered now was what I was going to do. I took a deep breath, the cold morning air filling my lungs, cooling the smoldering embers of my anger. I needed a clear head, a solid plan. Impulses and tears weren't going to get my house back. Only smart, decisive action would. My hand, now surprisingly steady, scrolled through my phone's contacts. I skipped right past Michael and Jessica. They had removed themselves from the list of people I needed to contact. I stopped at a name I hadn't called in a long time: Henderson, Repairs. Mr. Henderson, or Ernie as Richard used to call him, was an old friend of my husband's. They had grown up together here in Ashland, fished together at Emigrant Lake, and fixed everything that broke in their homes together. Ernie was a plumber and a master locksmith, a man of the old school, where a handshake was worth more than a contract. After Richard passed, I hadn't seen him much, but his number was still there, a relic of a time gone by. I pressed call. After a few rings, a deep, gravelly voice, the kind that comes from a lifetime of pipe smoking, answered. "Henderson." "Mr. Henderson?" I said, my voice even, without a tremor. it's Eleanor Vance." There was a short pause on the other end, then a quiet, "Ah," filled with surprise and a touch of nostalgia. "Mrs. Vance, it's been a long time. Are you doing all right?" "I'm still kicking, Ernie," I replied curtly. "I need your help with something urgent." "Of course. What is it? Leaky pipe again?" "Not pipes," I said, my eyes still glued to the cold silver lock on my front door. "I'm locked out of my own house. I need you to come over immediately, break the new lock, and replace the entire system with something else, the best you've got." Another pause. I could picture his brow furrowing in thought over the phone. He was a man who understood things. He wouldn't ask unnecessary prying questions. "I see," he said, his voice firm. "Give me 15 minutes. Don't go anywhere." The call ended. I felt a surge of strength course through my veins. I had taken the first step. Next, the second call. This one was even more important. I found the name Harrison, attorney. Mr. Harrison, or Howard as Richard called him, wasn't just our family lawyer for 30 years. He was Richard's best friend. They had gone through college together, been the best man at each other's weddings, and watched their children grow up together. Howard was the embodiment of integrity and wisdom. He was the only person in the world, besides Richard, whom I trusted completely. This time, I didn't call directly. I knew he'd be busy at this hour. I left a voicemail, my voice calm but carrying an undeniable urgency. "Howard, it's Eleanor. I know you're busy, but I have an extremely serious legal issue concerning the house. We need to talk as soon as you possibly can. Richard would never forgive what's happening. Please, call me back." I emphasized Richard's name. It was a code, a call to arms that I knew Howard would understand. With that done, I got out of the car. 15 minutes later, Mr. Henderson's old blue pickup truck turned onto my street. He stepped out, his silver hair neatly combed, wearing his familiar work overalls. He wasn't carrying his usual toolbox, but a heavy-duty canvas bag. His eyes glanced at me, then settled on the new lock on the door, and his bushy eyebrows knitted together. "Cheap Chinese junk," he muttered with disdain. "All flash, no substance. A kid could pick this thing." He didn't ask me who did it. He didn't ask why. He simply got to work. "Mrs. Vance, you might want to step back a bit." I stood on the lawn, my arms crossed, watching my husband's old friend work. He pulled out a specialized drill and a few other tools I didn't recognize. The high-pitched whine of the drill split the morning quiet. It sounded like the scream of rage I'd been holding inside. Shavings of metal flew. In less than 5 minutes, there was a sharp crack. The lock cylinder was destroyed. Mr. Henderson used another tool to turn the inner mechanism. The door swung open. I took a deep breath. The air from inside the house washed over me. The sharp smell of new paint, the foreign scent of a citrus air freshener, the smell of an invasion. "I'll put in a medico set for you, mister," Henderson said, already pulling a box from his bag. "Drill-proof, pick-proof. The chief of police uses this brand on his own home. Nobody's getting in without your key." "Thank you, Ernie," I said, my voice sincere. "What do I owe you?" He waved his hand dismissively. "Don't talk about money right now, Eleanor. Just consider it a favor for Richard. He'd have done the same for me." He began expertly dismantling the old lock. "Go on inside. It's your house." I crossed the threshold. Each step on the oak floor now sounded alien. I didn't go far. I stood in the living room, taking it all in. The devastation was even worse than what I'd seen through the window. They didn't just change the furniture, they had tried to rip the soul out of this house. The wall where photos of our family had hung Michael learning to walk, family camping trips, my wedding portrait with Richard was now bare, with only faint nail holes remaining like scars. My heart ached, but I didn't let myself be weak. This was not the time to mourn the past. This was the time for action. And so, I began. I didn't rush. I did everything methodically, deliberately, with an almost frightening silence. First, I went to the guest room, which they had turned into their master bedroom. My bed was still there, but Jessica's charcoal gray silk bedding had replaced my floral comforter. I stripped it all off, balled it up, and threw it in the middle of the room. Next was the closet. Michael's and Jessica's clothes hung side by side, his expensive suits, her designer dresses, shoes, handbags, accessories. I took it all out, piece by piece. I didn't just dump them. I carried them to the living room and started a large pile. Then the bathroom. Jessica's high-end cosmetics lined the shelves: cleansers, creams, serums, perfumes. I swept them all into a basket. The hairdryer, the curling iron. I took those too. I went from room to room like a professional cleaner. The kitchen, the shiny espresso machine, the German knife block, Jessica's boxes of health supplements and protein powder. The office, the new iMac computer, stacks of documents, books on business and self-help. The living room, the smart speaker system, the soulless decorative pillows, the white shag rug. Everything that belonged to them, everything they had brought in to replace my world, I gathered it all. The house slowly shed its foreign skin, revealing its familiar, though wounded, frame. When Mr. Henderson finished installing the new lock and handed me a set of 3 shiny keys, he looked at the enormous pile of belongings in the living room, his surprise obvious. "Planning a big spring cleaning, are we, Eleanor?" he asked, trying to make a joke. I looked at him, a faint smile on my lips. "Something like that, Ernie. A deep clean. I'm getting rid of everything that doesn't belong here." He nodded, his face full of understanding. "If you need anything else, you just call." "I will, thank you." After he left, I began the final stage. I opened the front door wide. Then, one item at a time, I carried their belongings outside and placed them on the green lawn in front of the house. I didn't throw them. I didn't toss them. I set them down carefully, almost respectfully. I arranged them. I folded the clothes into neat stacks. I lined up the shoes in rows. The expensive handbags were stood upright. The coffee machine, the computer, the smart speakers, everything had its own place. I turned my front lawn into a piece of installation art. An open-air exhibit titled "The Invaders." It was a silent, clear, and cold message. The neighbors started to notice. I saw Mrs. Carroll peeking through her curtains, a look of confusion on her face. A car driving by slowed down, the driver staring. I didn't care. I just kept working. Finally, when everything was displayed, I walked over to the trash cans. I bent down and picked up Richard's walnut box. I brushed off the grime, wiping it clean on the hem of my coat. I held it to my chest, feeling the familiar warmth of the wood grain. This was the only thing I was keeping. I went back inside and shut the door. The new deadbolt clicked into place with a solid, final sound. The house was now empty and quiet, but it was mine, completely and utterly mine. I walked to the kitchen, placed the wooden box on the table, and made myself a pot of tea. I sat down in my old chair and took a sip of the hot tea. The familiar taste of Earl Grey spread through my mouth, calming my nerves. I looked out the window at my art installation on the lawn. I knew they would be back soon. The confrontation was inevitable. The silence after the door closed was different. It wasn't the suffocating quiet of the past few days, where I had to tiptoe and swallow my words in my own home. This was a silence that belonged to me, a peaceful space I had reclaimed with my own 2 hands. I sat at the kitchen table, my Earl Grey half gone, its warmth spreading through my palms. Richard's walnut box sat before me like a trophy, the wood grain telling old stories. I had cleaned it, every corner, restoring its original beauty. It felt like a symbol of my own rebirth. I didn't just sit there and wait passively. I knew they wouldn't be back right away. They were in Hawaii, soaking up the sun, sand, and the illusion of their successful plan. They needed a nudge, a push to face the reality I had laid out for them. With an almost mechanical calm, I picked up my phone. I didn't look for Michael's or Jessica's number. I found the main number for the airline I guessed they had flown. With a few clever questions and some personal details only a mother would know, I got their flight and hotel information. Then, I made a call I never in my life thought I would make. I called the luxury hotel where they were staying. When the receptionist answered, I had a shaky, panicked voice ready, a performance calculated down to the last detail. "Please," I said, my voice urgent. "I'm a doctor from Ashland General Hospital. I need to speak with a Mr. Michael Vance and a Miss Jessica Chen immediately. It's a family emergency. Very, very serious." I knew it was a cruel thing to do, to sow panic like that, but my kindness had been trampled on. It was time to use the weapons they themselves had taught me: manipulation and calculation. No message would be ignored, no call would go unanswered. They would have to come back, immediately. The rest of the day, I spent cleaning up the remnants of the invasion. I threw open all the windows, letting the Oregon breeze blow through, carrying away the smell of new paint and strange perfumes. I went through each room, putting my own remaining things back in order. I brought the family photos down from the attic. One by one, I wiped them clean and placed them back on the empty wall. Michael learning to walk. Our family on a trip to Crater Lake National Park. My wedding photo with Richard, where he looked at me with so much love. The blank wall had its soul back. I put my familiar floral bedspread back on the bed. I set my half-read books back on the coffee table. I returned my ceramic spice jars to the kitchen shelf. Every action was an affirmation, a ritual of reclaiming my territory. The house was slowly starting to breathe again, in my rhythm. That night, for the first time in months, I slept soundly in my own bed. No nightmares, no anxiety. The next morning, I knew they would be home. The earliest flight from Hawaii would land around noon. I made myself a big breakfast, something I hadn't done in a long time. Fried eggs, bacon, and toast. I ate slowly, savoring every bite. I needed my strength for the coming confrontation. At 1 o'clock sharp, a taxi pulled up to the curb. I was sitting in the living room, in Richard's armchair, a book in my hand but my eyes fixed on the street. Michael and Jessica got out, their faces etched with panic and worry. They were still in their vacation clothes, their skin tanned, looking completely out of place in the gray Ashland afternoon. They practically ran to the door. And then, they stopped dead in their tracks. Sheer shock registered on both their faces as they saw the scene on the lawn. Their belongings, arranged in an eerily orderly fashion, looked like a silent mockery. The panic about the family emergency was instantly replaced by disbelief and rage. Jessica was the first to react. "What the hell is this?" she shrieked, her voice shrill, shattering the neighborhood's quiet. She turned on Michael, her eyes blazing. "Look what your mother did!" Michael looked bewildered. He looked from the pile of stuff to the front door with its new lock, then back to Jessica. He stammered, "Mom, she's back." They rushed to the door and tried their key. Useless. Jessica started pounding on the door. "Mom, open up! What kind of crazy game are you playing?" I waited until they had worn themselves out. Then I slowly put my book down, stood up, and went to the door. I didn't throw it open. I opened it just a crack, enough for me to see them and them to see me, while still keeping a safe distance. My body blocked most of the entrance. My face was completely calm. "Oh, you're back," I said, my voice light, as if welcoming them home from a trip to the grocery store. "Did you have a nice time in Hawaii?" Jessica was stunned by my composure. She pointed a finger at their things. "What is all this? Why would you do this?" "Oh, that," I replied, my gaze sweeping over my exhibit. "I was just returning some things that don't belong in this house. I thought you might have left them behind." "Left them behind?" Michael finally spoke, his voice full of disbelief. "You threw all our stuff out on the street." "I didn't throw it," I corrected him, my voice still even. "I placed it there very carefully. I wouldn't want to damage any of your expensive things." Jessica let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "What do you think you're doing? This is our house too. You have no right." And that's when I played my trump card. I looked my daughter-in-law straight in the eye, my calmness like the surface of a lake before a storm. "Is that so? This house is yours too?" I paused, letting the question hang in the air. "Then I guess you won't mind that I'm speaking with my lawyer, Mr. Harrison, tomorrow morning," I continued, my voice slow and deliberate. "He's very interested in the application for a $250,000 line of credit that was taken out against this house, filed under my name, last Tuesday while I was in Texas. It's funny, I don't recall signing any paperwork." I stopped, watching their reactions. The color drained from Jessica's face. The anger vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unmasked terror. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She had been completely blindsided. I turned to Michael. My son looked even worse. He turned to his wife, his eyes wide with confusion, suspicion, and a dawning horror. Jessica, what did you do? He stammered. I pressed on, giving them no time to recover. And the signature, Jessica, I said, my voice like ice. It looks quite a bit like mine. You must have practiced. But it's just a little shaky. Perhaps you were nervous while committing financial fraud and forgery, a felony that could land you in prison for several years. Silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Jessica stood frozen, her face as white as a sheet. Michael took a step back, looking at his wife as if she were a stranger. All of Jessica's confidence, her superiority, had evaporated, leaving behind the naked truth of a cornered con artist. I knew I had won, not with yelling, not with tears, but with facts and preparation. I hadn't just taken back my house. I had turned the tables completely. Now, I said, my voice final, ending the drama, I think you two have a lot to talk about, but not here. Go rent a hotel room and sort out your mess. I looked at Michael. And you, son, when you're ready to talk like a grown man, you can call my lawyer. Don't call me. And with that, I slowly closed the door. When the heavy oak door clicked shut, separating my world from the mess on my lawn, a profound silence fell over me. It wasn't the silence of a cheering victory, but a heavy, almost hollow quiet that follows an earthquake. I leaned my back against the door, feeling its solid strength, and for the first time in hours, I let out a long, slow breath. My chest rose and fell, and I realized I'd been holding my breath the entire time I confronted them. In that moment, there was no joy of revenge. There was only a vast, deep sadness. The sadness of seeing my daughter-in-law's true colors, and even more frightening, the weak complicity of the son I had raised. I had turned the tables, but the cost was the shattering of my final illusion of family. The picture of a happy family, though cracked for a long time, was now officially broken into a million pieces. I didn't allow myself to drown in that sorrow. Self-pity was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, and drank it all down. The cool water soothed my dry throat. I looked out the side window. The taxi was gone. The pile of their belongings was still there, a silent testament. I didn't know where they had gone, and I didn't care. They had been ejected from my orbit. My phone vibrated. An unknown number. I hesitated for a second, then answered, bracing myself for anything. Howard Harrison's voice, deep and reliable, came through. Eleanor, it's me. I just got your voicemail. My God, what in the world is going on? Howard, I said, my voice steady. Thank you for calling back. They tried to steal my house. I didn't have to explain who they were. Howard was quiet on the other end for a long moment, a silence filled with the shock and concern of a dear old friend. Where are you? Are you safe? I'm at home. I'm safe. I've taken my house back. What do you mean? I'll tell you everything, I replied, but not over the phone. Can I come to your office tomorrow morning? As early as possible. 9 o'clock, Eleanor. Don't you worry about a thing. Just get here. We'll sort this out. The call ended. Having Howard's assurance felt like a solid anchor in a storm. That night, I cleaned up the last remnants of their presence. I mopped the floors, rearranged the books. I did small physical tasks to keep my mind from racing. I needed to stay clear-headed for the next day. The following morning, I chose an outfit I hadn't worn in ages. Not the comfortable baggy sweaters I usually wore around the house. I put on a silk blouse the color of seafoam, tailored black trousers, and a cream-colored wool blazer. I put on a little makeup, a touch of dusty rose lipstick. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back no longer looked tired and pathetic. She looked calm, in control, and a little bit tough. I wasn't going to a lawyer's office as a victim. I was going as a client seeking justice. Howard Harrison's office was on the second floor of an old brick building in downtown Ashland. It wasn't a flashy law office with glass walls and modern furniture. It was like Howard himself, solid, dependable, and a bit old-fashioned. The walls were lined with mahogany bookshelves filled with thick, leather-bound law books. The air smelled of old paper, polished wood, and freshly brewed coffee. Howard met me at the door. He had aged since I'd last seen him at Richard's funeral. His hair was completely white, and there were more lines around his sharp eyes. but his handshake was still firm, and the look he gave me was full of genuine warmth and concern. "Eleanor, come in. It's good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." We sat in 2 leather armchairs across from his massive desk. On the desk, beside a neat stack of files, was a framed photograph. It was of a young Richard and Howard, 2 college boys with their arms around each other's shoulders, grinning, an old University of Oregon banner behind them. A wave of memory washed over me, but I quickly pushed it down. "Now tell me everything," Howard said, his tone serious. "From the very beginning." And I told him. I told him clearly, leaving out no detail. I told him about Michael and Jessica moving in, about the slow changes to the house, about my trip to Texas. I told him about the night in my car, about finding my things in the trash. And finally, I placed a copy of the loan application, which I'd had the bank email to me, on his desk. Howard put on his reading glasses and picked up the paper. He read it carefully, his brow furrowing deeper and deeper. The silence in the room grew heavy. When he was finished, he leaned back in his chair, took off his glasses, and let out a long sigh. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not only the sympathy of a friend, but the outrage of a legal professional. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low, "this is no longer just a family dispute. This is a crime." "I know," I replied firmly. "No, I don't think you fully grasp the severity of it," he stressed. "Forging a signature on a financial document to secure a loan of this size in the state of Oregon is classified as aggravated theft in the 1st degree. This is a felony. Add to that the charge of forgery. If convicted, Jessica could be facing up to 10 years in prison." The words felony, prison, echoed in the quiet room, sounding heavy and frightening. Even though I was prepared, hearing it from a lawyer was still a shock. This was my daughter-in-law, my son's wife. Howard seemed to read my thoughts. "I know this is hard to stomach, Eleanor, but we have to call it what it is. She tried to steal your single greatest asset with calculation and without hesitation. This wasn't a mistake. This was a conspiracy." He paused, looking me straight in the eye. "Now, we have a few options, and you need to make a very difficult decision. The first and most aggressive option is that you report this to the police. We have all the evidence we need. They will open a criminal investigation," he continued. "The advantage of this option is that it sends a clear message that you will not tolerate this behavior. It will create a solid legal barrier to protect you and your assets in the future. But the downside," he hesitated, "is that once you file a report, it's out of our hands. It becomes a public case. Michael's name, even if he didn't directly participate in the forgery, will be dragged into it. The local papers might pick it up. It will be a stain on the family that's hard to wash out." I was silent, thinking about his words. The image of Michael on a witness stand, even just as a witness, made my heart ache. "The second option," Howard went on, "is we don't go to the police right away. Instead, we use this evidence as leverage. I will draft a legal letter to both of them, informing them that we are aware of this criminal act and demanding they adhere to certain conditions to avoid prosecution. Those conditions would include Jessica signing an agreement to never have any contact with you or your assets, and Michael adhering to similar restrictions. At the same time, we'll file for a temporary restraining order. This option," he explained, "gives us more control over the situation, avoids public scandal, and might give Michael a chance to get out from under his wife's influence. But it also has risks. It could be seen as a sign of weakness, and Jessica might try to find another way to bend the rules." I looked at the photo of Richard and Howard on the desk. Richard was always a believer in justice, but he also believed in second chances. What would he do? But then I realized, this wasn't Richard's story. This was my story, and I had to make the decision for myself. I had given Michael too many chances already. His silence, his complicity, had caused this pain. Punishing Jessica was one thing, but forcing Michael to face the consequences of his weakness was another. Perhaps a powerful shock was the only thing that could wake him up. "We'll do both," I said, my voice clear and resolute in the room. Howard raised his eyebrows. "I want you to file for the restraining order immediately," I continued, "to ensure they can't come near me or the house. Then I want you to draft that legal letter. But I also want to file a police report. Not to send Jessica to jail right away, but to have an official record. To have her actions documented by the law. It will be a sword hanging over her head. If she ever tries anything again, we won't hesitate." Howard looked at me for a long moment, his eyes showing surprise and then deep respect. "That's a very smart strategy, Eleanor, and a very tough one. I've learned my lesson, Howard. Weakness only invites more aggression." "Very well," he nodded. "I'll get started right away. Now, there are other matters we need to discuss. Your will, your bank accounts, your investments. We need to review and fortify everything." "What do you mean? Do you have any joint bank accounts with Michael? Any power of attorney that allows him to make transactions on your behalf?" I froze. Yes, I had added Michael's name to my savings account years ago, just in case something happened to me. I had trusted him completely. "We have to freeze that account immediately," Howard said, his voice firm, "and revoke any and all power of attorney. I'll draft the necessary paperwork. From this moment on, we are building a legal firewall around you. There can be no loopholes." I nodded, feeling like I was entering a real war. A war without guns, but full of strategy and hidden risks. The meeting lasted another hour. When I left Howard's office, I felt exhausted, but also strangely relieved. The burden was no longer on my shoulders alone. I had an ally, a seasoned general. Driving home, the world looked the same. People were walking down the street, shops were open. But for me, everything had changed. I had crossed an invisible line. I was no longer just a mother who loved and sacrificed. I had become a warrior, defending my territory and my very existence. When I got home, I stepped into the house that was now protected by strong locks and soon, by the full force of the law. The silence that greeted me felt, for the first time, completely safe. While I was fortifying my castle with Howard in another corner of Ashland, in a cheap hotel room thick with the smell of disinfectant and disappointment, the real storm was just beginning to brew. They had checked into the Cedar Lodge, a motel on the edge of town, the only place they could find at the last minute with the little cash they had left. The room was grim, with a faded carpet, an old television, and a window overlooking a noisy parking lot, a harsh contrast to what they had just lost. Their expensive belongings were still sitting on my lawn, a monument to their failure. A heavy silence, thick with unspoken accusations, filled the room as they entered. Michael tossed the key onto the nightstand and collapsed onto the edge of the bed, burying his face in his hands. Jessica, however, stood in the middle of the room, her arms crossed, her face a rigid mask of anger and humiliation. Her usual arrogance was gone, leaving only the raw exposure of a loser. "I can't believe she did that," Jessica hissed, breaking the silence. "Throwing our things out on the street like garbage, lying to the airline. She's vicious." Michael lifted his head. His eyes were bloodshot, not from crying, but from exhaustion and confusion. "Vicious, Jessica? Is she the vicious one, or are you?" His voice wasn't loud, but it was filled with bitterness. "You tried to steal my mother's house. You forged her signature. You lied to me. Do you have any idea what happens if she calls the police?" "She won't," Jessica scoffed, but there was no confidence in her voice. "She loves you. She would never do anything to hurt her precious golden boy." "Don't you dare use my mother's love to justify what you did," Michael shot back. The first time I'd ever heard him use that tone with his wife. I saw her face. That wasn't the face of an angry mother. That was the face of someone who is completely and utterly disappointed. Someone who has lost all faith. He stood up, pacing the cramped room. "How could you do it, Jessica? $250,000? What were you going to do with that money?" "Help us!" Jessica yelled, her defensiveness turning into an attack. "Help you! Do you know how pathetic you look, having to move back in with your mommy? Do you know how embarrassing that was for me? I just wanted us to have a fresh start, a chance to stand on our own 2 feet. I wanted to leverage the value of that house, an asset that was just sitting there, being wasted. She's too old to understand these things." "Wasted?" Michael laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "That house is my mother's entire life. It's where my father took his last breath." "And you call it wasted?" He stopped, looking Jessica straight in the eye. "No, Jessica, you didn't do it for us. You did it for you. You always do. Their fight raged late into the night, hurling poisonous words that ripped apart the facade of their already fractured relationship. Jessica accused Michael of being a weak, washed-up failure who was always hiding behind his mother. Michael accused Jessica of being a selfish, greedy manipulator. They dragged out every resentment, every disappointment that had been building up for years. The breaking point came the next morning. While Jessica was in the shower, Michael, driven by a gut feeling, opened her laptop. He never invaded her privacy, but something in her words the night before had made him suspicious. She had defended herself too smoothly, too perfectly, as if she had rehearsed it. And then he found it. It wasn't hard. In a folder on the desktop labeled Project Oregon, he found Jessica's entire plan. It wasn't just a plan to get a loan, it was a plan for a complete takeover. Michael found dozens of image files. They were scans of my signature from old birthday cards and letters I had sent them. Jessica had practiced signing my name over and over until it was nearly indistinguishable. He found an email chain with a loan officer named Rick, who seemed all too willing to overlook a few verification procedures in exchange for a finder's fee. In the emails, Jessica had confidently stated that my mother is fully on board and has authorized me to handle the necessary procedures. But what made Michael's world truly collapse was an Excel spreadsheet titled Budget Allocation Plan. In it, Jessica had laid out a detailed plan for what she would do with the $250,000 loan. There was no money allocated to help Michael rebuild his career. There was no money for a fresh start for both of us. Instead, nearly $150,000 was slated for an investment in a fashion tech startup in San Francisco, a project Jessica had hidden from Michael. Another $50,000 was marked to pay off Jessica's personal debts, credit card bills she had claimed were long paid off, and the rest was noted as living expenses and personal brand repositioning, 1 year. And below the budget, there was a small note, a single line that was like a knife straight to Michael's heart. Phase 2. Convince M to agree to place E in an assisted living facility. Rationale: declining health, needs professional care. Goal: full ownership and liquidation of asset in 12 to 18 months. E was Eleanor. M was Michael. It wasn't just a plan to steal money. It was a plan to erase me from my own life. Michael told me later that when he read those words, he didn't feel anger anymore. He just felt a terrifying emptiness. The woman he had loved, had married, had sworn to spend his life with, was a complete stranger. A cold-blooded monster hiding behind a beautiful, sharp facade. When Jessica came out of the bathroom, refreshed and seemingly having regained her confidence overnight, she found Michael sitting motionlessly in front of the laptop. "What are you doing?" she asked, a note of irritation in her voice at seeing him on her computer. Michael didn't answer. He just slowly turned the laptop screen towards her. Jessica's expression changed in an instant. The confidence vanished, replaced by sheer panic as she realized her plan had been exposed. "Michael, I can explain," she stammered. "Explain?" Michael repeated, his voice frighteningly calm. "What are you going to explain, Jessica? Are you going to explain Phase 2? Are you going to explain the plan to put my mother in a nursing home so you could take her house?" All her excuses were useless. The proof was right there. Jessica stood frozen, her face pale. Michael stood up. He grabbed his wallet and his car keys. "I used to think I was a failure," he said, his voice thick. "But I was wrong. My biggest failure was marrying you." He walked towards the door without looking back. "Where are you going, Michael?" Jessica cried out after him, her voice filled with panic. Michael stopped at the door, his hand on the knob. "I'm going to try and find what little dignity I have left," he said, "and I'm going to start by confessing to my mother." The motel room door closed, leaving Jessica alone with the naked truth and her completely shattered plan. As for Michael, he was driving to the house he had helped betray, not to ask for forgiveness, but to face the truth as an accomplice. 2 days after the confrontation on my porch, the silence I had been expecting settled over the house. There were no angry calls, no accusatory texts. The pile of belongings on the lawn had also vanished quietly the night before, likely cleared away by a truck they hired in the dead of night, like thieves in reverse. I spent that time regaining my equilibrium. I gardened, I read, and I tried not to think about what would happen next, knowing it was just the calm before another storm. The legal letter and the restraining order application had been sent by Howard. The joint savings account was frozen. My legal firewall was up, solid and cold. I had done everything I could to protect myself. The rest was out of my hands. On a Thursday afternoon, as I was sitting on my back porch with a cup of tea, watching the hummingbirds sip nectar from the fuchsia blossoms, the doorbell rang. It wasn't the frantic, angry ringing I had braced myself for, but a single, hesitant, almost timid chime. My heart skipped a beat. I knew who it was. I walked through the living room and peeked through the small window next to the front door. Just as I thought, Michael was standing alone on the porch. He wasn't wearing his usual sharp architect's suit. He was in a wrinkled shirt and faded jeans. He looked thinner, haggard. His shoulders were slumped, and he was staring down at his shoes, as if he didn't dare look up at the door. Jessica's laptop was tucked under his arm, looking strangely out of place. I stood there for a long moment, weighing my options. The temporary restraining order Howard had filed meant that, legally, he wasn't supposed to be here. But I knew this confrontation was inevitable, and I needed to hear what he had to say. I opened the door. Michael flinched and looked up, and when he saw me, a look of raw pain and shame filled his eyes. They were his father's eyes, but right now, they held none of Richard's warmth and sparkle, only emptiness and torment. He made no move to step inside. He just stood there, on the other side of the threshold. "Mom," he said, his voice raspy, Can I come in and talk to you for a minute?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, my expression cold and searching. I took a step back, a silent permission. Michael stepped inside, and as he crossed the threshold, he seemed to shrink, as if the very air in the house was weighing him down. He didn't dare look around, didn't dare look at the family photos on the wall, the same photos he had indifferently allowed his wife to take down just days before. "Let's go out to the back porch," I said, my voice flat. I didn't want this conversation to happen in the living room, a space filled with memories that had been so violated. We sat in the two wicker chairs, facing each other. I set my teacup down, but I didn't offer him anything. The time for hospitality was over. There was now an invisible chasm between us, a canyon carved by betrayal. He placed the laptop on the table. "I think you should see this." "I don't need to," I replied. "My lawyer explained everything. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit theft. I know all of it." Michael hung his head, and his shoulders began to shake. "No, Mom. There are things a lawyer can't know. Things that I only just found out myself." He opened the laptop and turned the screen towards me. He said nothing, just used a trembling finger to open the Excel file named Budget Allocation Plan. I narrowed my eyes and read the lines on the screen. The investment plan, the personal debt repayment. And then I got to the last line. Phase 2. Convince M to agree to place E in an assisted living facility. An icy chill shot down my spine, colder than the night I slept in my car. This wasn't just greed. This was cruelty down to its very core. They didn't just want my money in my house. They wanted to erase my existence. They wanted to lock me away somewhere to wither and die in obscurity, while they enjoyed the fruits of a lifetime of my and Richard's hard work. I looked up at my son. He was crying, not loud, dramatic sobs, but silent tears streaming down his gaunt face. "I didn't know, Mom," he choked out. I swear I had no idea about this part of the plan. I thought she wanted to borrow some money so we could get back on our feet. I was so stupid, so blind. I didn't comfort him. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, in silence. My silence seemed to be more terrifying than any scolding. It forced Michael to fill the void with his own confession. "I let her blind me," he continued, his voice breaking. "I was so ashamed of my own failures that I clung to her confidence. When she said you were out of touch, I didn't argue. When she took down our family photos, I stayed quiet. When she changed everything in this house, I told myself it was just temporary, that she meant well." He looked up, meeting my eyes, his own filled with desperation. But it wasn't good intentions, it was control. And I let her control everything. This house, me, and even how I saw you." He took a deep breath, as if gathering all his courage to say the worst of it. "I became an accomplice, Mom. I didn't forge the signature, I didn't write this plan. But my silence, my weakness, allowed all of this to happen. I am just as guilty as she is." He put the laptop on the table and pushed it towards me. "This is the proof. You can give it to your lawyer. It will help your case. I don't care what happens to her anymore." "She's not my wife." "Is she gone?" I asked, my voice the first sound after a long silence. He nodded. "I told her to leave the moment I read this." I looked at my son's tormented face. A part of me, the mother in me, wanted to reach out and hold him, to tell him it would be okay. But I didn't. The wound was too deep. The betrayal was too great. Easy comfort now would only be an excuse for his actions. Instead, I said, "Your silence allowed this to happen, Michael. I told you that once." He nodded, fresh tears welling up. "I know, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life." "So why are you here?" I asked directly. "To ask for my forgiveness." He shook his head vehemently. "No, I know I don't deserve it. I wanted you to know the truth, the whole truth. I wanted you to know that, even though it's too late, I see how wrong I was, and I'm here to accept whatever consequences come." He stood up, but he didn't leave. He stood before me, a 2-year-old man who looked as fragile and broken as a little boy. "You can go forward with the lawsuit," he said, his voice firm. "You can make sure I don't inherit a single thing. You can decide you never want to see me again. I'll accept all of it. It's the price I have to pay." I was quiet for a long time, looking out at the garden. The Mr. Lincoln roses were in full bloom, their red petals brilliant against the afternoon sun. Richard had planted them with so much hope. Finally, I looked back at him. "Give this laptop to my lawyer," I said. "You have his number. Tell him everything you just told me. That's the first step." "Yes, I'll do it right away," he replied, his voice full of gratitude for being given a concrete task. "As for forgiveness," I continued, my voice cool but clear, "you were right. You don't deserve it, and I'm not ready to give it. Trust, once it's broken, can't be fixed with just an apology." I stood up, signaling that our conversation was over. Michael bowed his head. "I understand." He picked up the laptop and turned to walk through the house to the front door. As he passed me, he paused for a fraction of a second. "Mom, I'm sorry," he whispered, a final, heartfelt, but horribly late apology. I didn't respond. I just stood there and watched his stooped figure until he disappeared behind the door. When the front door clicked shut, I sank back into my chair, feeling as though all my strength had been drained away. The confession had been made. The truth was out. But it brought no relief. It only left a bigger ache, a deeper emptiness. After Michael's confession, a different kind of silence settled over the house. This time, it was the silence of the raw truth. There were no more doubts, no more assumptions. Just the cold, undeniable fact of a systematic betrayal. Jessica's laptop, now safely in Howard's possession, was irrefutable proof, a detailed indictment of greed and cruelty. Howard moved quickly. With the new evidence, the legal letter to Jessica was no longer a warning. It was an ultimatum. Faced with the undeniable threat of criminal prosecution, Jessica had no choice. Through her lawyer, she quickly agreed to every term Howard laid out, signing a permanent legal agreement promising never to contact me, my home, or any of my assets in any way, shape, or form, and accepting the restraining order without contest. She vanished from our lives as quickly as she had appeared, a greedy ghost finally exorcised. For Michael, things were more complicated. His confession, however sincere, couldn't erase what had happened. He called Howard, told the whole story again, and surrendered the laptop. That act, Howard told me, showed remorse and could mitigate some legal blowback if things went to court. But it didn't change the fact that he had been part of it, even if passively. A few days later, I received a letter from Michael. Not a call, not a text. A handwritten letter, sent through the mail, with an old-fashioned formality. His handwriting, usually strong and confident, was shaky and labored. In the letter, he didn't apologize again. He knew the word had become hollow. Instead, he laid out a plan. He had filed for divorce from Jessica. He had found a job at a small architectural firm in Portland, nearly a 5-hour drive from Ashland. He had rented a small studio apartment. He said he needed to leave, to stand on his own 2 feet, to relearn how to be a man, a son who could be trusted. At the end of the letter, he wrote, "I'm not asking for a second chance, Mom. I know I don't deserve one. I'm just asking for time. Time for me to prove with my actions that I've changed. And if one day, years from now, you could even consider letting me come back to the garden just to water Dad's roses, that would be more grace than I deserve." I read the letter many times. Every word was soaked in regret and a profound sadness. It wasn't an attempt at manipulation or a plea for pity. It was a real plan, a path to redemption he was mapping out for himself. I didn't answer the letter. My silence once again was the answer. I needed to see his actions, not his words. The next week, on a Saturday morning, Howard called me. "Eleanor, there's one last thing we need to handle. Michael's lawyer has been in touch. He would like to come and collect his remaining personal effects from the garage and the attic. He has offered to come at a time of your choosing and is willing to have me or a third party present to supervise." My heart tightened. This was it. The final departure, the final physical severing. "All right, Howard," I said, my voice calm. "Tell him Sunday at noon. And there's no need for a lawyer to supervise. I'll be here." "Are you sure, Eleanor?" Howard asked, his voice laced with concern. "The restraining order. The order is for Jessica. And I think I need to be here, to close this chapter for good." That Sunday, the Ashland sky was gray with a light drizzle. I sat in the living room, looking out the window. At 12 o'clock sharp, a small U-Haul truck pulled up to the curb. Michael got out. Alone. He looked even thinner than before. I opened the door before he could ring the bell. We faced each other on the threshold, the misty rain dampening his shoulders. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "Hello, Michael," I replied. There were no hugs, no unnecessary words. I stepped back and let him in. He carried a few empty cardboard boxes. "Your things are in the garage and the attic," I said, pointing the way. "Take whatever is yours." He nodded and quietly went about his task. I didn't follow him. I sat back down in Richard's armchair, listening to the sound of his footsteps overhead, the rustle of him pulling out old boxes, the clatter as he sorted through things. Every sound was like a small hammer tapping on a memory. These were the boxes that held his childhood, the model car kits he and Richard had built together, his old comic books, high school yearbooks, things I had carefully saved for all these years, thinking one day he might want to show them to his own children. After about an hour, he started bringing down carefully taped boxes. He worked silently and efficiently. As he passed through the living room, he avoided my gaze. When the last box was in the truck, he came back inside, holding one thing. It was a brown leather photo album, the one I had made for him when he graduated from college. He placed the album on the coffee table in front of me. I can't take this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It belongs here." I looked at the album. I remembered staying up for nights, gluing in each photo, writing every caption. "That's everything," he said. "I've got all my things." He stood at the door, seeming to want to say something more, but then he stopped himself. Finally, I was the one who spoke. "You found a job in Portland?" He seemed surprised by my question. "Yes, a small firm, but the work is good. I start next Monday." "And a place to live?" "I rented a studio. It's enough for one person." We stood in silence. The rain outside had started to fall a little harder. "Take care of yourself," I said. It wasn't forgiveness. It was just a mother's reflex, a final spark of warmth left in the ashes. He nodded, his eyes red. "You too, Mom." And then he turned, walked out, and closed the door behind him. I heard the engine of the U-Haul start, then the sound of the truck slowly pulling away, fading until all that was left was the steady patter of rain on the porch roof. The departure was complete. I sat alone in the quiet house, staring at the photo album on the table. I didn't open it. Not yet. The wound was still too raw. Michael had been forced to leave, not because I kicked him out, but because he had chosen that path for himself, a long, lonely road to find himself again. I didn't know if that road would ever lead him back to me, but I knew this departure was necessary. Necessary for him, so he could learn to grow up. And necessary for me, so I could learn to live a life that was no longer defined by my role as a mother. I stood up, went to the kitchen, and started making dinner for one. The house was now truly and only mine, and for the first time, I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. After Michael's U-Haul disappeared into the rain, a new kind of quiet settled over the house. It wasn't the empty silence of loss. It was the quiet of a blank page, a clean space waiting for a new story to be written. Michael's departure, as painful as it was, had officially closed a turbulent chapter of my life. It created a necessary void, not just in the house, but in my mind, allowing the healing to begin. The first few weeks passed slowly. I was learning to live alone again, but this was different from the 12 years before, after Richard passed so suddenly. The loneliness then was a chasm of emptiness. This time, being alone felt like freedom, a release. I no longer had to worry about someone judging my meals, or tiptoeing in the morning, or seeing strange furniture in my own space. I could leave a half-read book on the sofa, blast Richard's jazz music as loud as I wanted, and spend a whole afternoon just watching the clouds drift by. The house was once again my sanctuary, an extension of myself. I began the process of reclaiming, not just legally, but spiritually. I called Susan in Texas and told her the whole story. She listened in silence and then said one simple thing. "You did the right thing, Eleanor. You chose yourself." Susan's words, free of judgment or pity, were a great comfort. I also started to return to old, forgotten habits. I rejoined the book club at the local library. I took morning walks around Lithia Park. I even signed up for a pottery class, something I had always wanted to try but never found the time for. My hands, so used to turning pages and tending roses, were now learning to shape formless lumps of clay into something with a soul. That process, strangely enough, felt just like the process of reshaping my own life. During all this time, I heard nothing from Michael. Not a call, not a text. His silence, this time, was not one of indifference, but of respect. He was giving me space, just as he had promised. And then, about a month after he left, on a Saturday morning while I was in the garden, trimming spent roses, a small pickup truck, not the U-Haul, parked across the street. Michael got out. He didn't walk towards the front door. Instead, he stood on the sidewalk, a good distance from my fence, as if there were an invisible line he didn't dare cross. He was wearing work clothes and carrying a pair of gardening gloves and a leaf rake. I straightened up, my heart beating a little faster. I said nothing, just watched him. He watched me back, his expression hesitant and anxious, but also resolute. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice just loud enough for me to hear. "I drove down today. I was just thinking, the autumn leaves are really starting to fall. I came to clean up the yard if that's okay with you." He didn't ask to come in the house. He didn't ask how I was. He just made a specific offer, an act of service, not a plea for words. I looked at the front lawn, covered in a blanket of yellow maple leaves, beautiful but in need of clearing. This was a job Richard had always done every fall. After he was gone, Michael had done it for the first few years, but then his own work and life had gotten in the way. I thought for a moment. This was a test, a first step on the path of atonement he had set for himself. "The tools are in the shed," I said, my voice neutral. "You know where it is." With that, I turned back to my roses, not looking at him anymore. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flicker of relief cross his face. He nodded, even though I wasn't looking, and walked towards the side gate to the shed. He worked all morning. He raked the leaves, pulled weeds, and trimmed the overgrown bushes. He worked diligently, quietly, and with focus. I continued my own work in the back garden. We existed in the same space, but in separate worlds, connected only by the rustle of dry leaves and the snip of pruning shears. When the sun was high overhead, he was finished. The yard looked neat and clean. Bags of leaves were tied up and stacked neatly by the trash cans. He walked over to where I was, still keeping that respectful distance. "I'm all done, Mom. I'm going to head out now." I nodded. "Thank you." He hesitated. "Next week, Could I come back and fertilize the rose bushes? They'll need it before winter sets in. I looked at Richard's roses and then back at him. This was the second step. All right, I replied. He didn't try to make more conversation. He just gave a small nod and turned to leave. And so, a new routine began. Every weekend or two, Michael would drive down from Portland. Each time, he did a job around the house. He fixed the broken fence picket. He repainted the peeling shutters. He cleaned out the clogged gutters. He never came inside, except to get a tool. He never asked for a meal or a glass of water. He just came, he worked, and he left. Our conversations were brief, strictly about the work at hand. Do you need me to look at that faucet in the kitchen? I heard it was dripping a bit. I bought the best organic fertilizer for the roses. I didn't refuse his help, but I didn't offer warmth either. I remained neutral, observant. I could see the change in him. He was thinner, but he looked stronger. The false confidence was gone, replaced by a quiet, mature gravity. He didn't talk about big projects or lucrative contracts anymore. He talked about concrete things, practical actions. One Sunday afternoon, after he had finished fixing the squeaky porch swing, he was getting ready to leave as usual. "Michael," I called after him. He turned, a look of surprise on his face. "I've made some tea," I said. "Would you like a cup before you drive back?" It was the first time in months I had offered him anything. His eyes lit up with a spark of warm hope. "Yes, I'd like that very much, Mom." We sat on the back porch, in the 2 wicker chairs, just like the afternoon of his confession. But the air was different. The tension was gone, replaced by a shy, but no longer hostile, quiet. We drank our tea in silence for a bit. "How is your work in Portland?" I asked, breaking the quiet. "It's good," he replied. "Not huge projects, mostly residential designs for families. But I like it. It feels meaningful. Are you settled in?" He nodded. "My apartment is small, but it's enough. I'm learning how to cook again. Your roast chicken. I've tried to make it a few times, but it's never as good." He smiled, a sad smile. "I miss your cooking." I didn't respond to that. It was still too soon for that kind of intimacy. "Your father would be proud of how you're taking care of the garden," I said, changing the subject. He looked out at the rose bushes. "I'm just trying to fix a very small part of what I broke." We sat for a little while longer, making small talk about the weather, about old neighbors. No apologies were said, no forgiveness was granted. But between us, a tiny, fragile bridge was beginning to be built, not with words, but with cups of tea, with afternoons in the garden, with patience, and with time. When he stood up to leave, he said, "Thank you for the tea, Mom." "Drive safely," was all I said. I stood on the porch and watched his truck drive away. Our reconciliation wouldn't be a big, emotional moment. It would be a slow, quiet process, like tending to a tree that had been battered by a storm. You have to patiently prune the broken branches, feed the damaged roots, and hope that, over time, new green shoots will appear. Time passed, bringing with it the seasons of falling leaves and new buds. My relationship with Michael was like the garden, with periods of quiet growth happening underground, unseen. His weekend visits became a familiar part of my life, an unspoken routine. He still never entered the house unless invited, and I only occasionally invited him for a cup of tea or a slice of cake. We maintained a safe distance, an almost formal respect for each other. I found joy in my own life. The pottery class had unlocked a creativity I never knew I had. The vases and bowls I made, though imperfect, were uniquely mine. I gave a few to Susan and Carol, and they loved them. I read more, I walked more, and for the first time in years, I started planning small solo trips to places I'd always wanted to see. I visited the Oregon coast in the winter to watch the wild, white-capped waves crash against the cliffs. I went to the Willamette Valley in the fall, losing myself in the brilliant colors of the vineyards. I was no longer just Eleanor Vance, Richard's widow, or Michael's mother. I was simply Eleanor, a woman rediscovering herself at 67. This newfound independence and peace gave me a different perspective on everything. The pain was still there, but it was no longer a raw, aching wound. It had become a scar, a part of who I was, a reminder of the hidden strength I found when I was pushed to the edge. One afternoon in early summer, about 2 years after Michael had left, Howard Harrison called me. "Eleanor, I'm calling with some news. Michael and Jessica's divorce is officially final. According to the settlement, she receives nothing connected to the Vance family assets." "Thank you for letting me know, Howard," I replied. "There's something else," he continued, a slight hesitation in his voice. "Throughout this whole process, Michael has shown an incredible amount of maturity and responsibility. He handled everything himself, never asking for any financial support. He's really changed." "Eleanor." "I know," I said softly. That evening, I thought a lot. About change, about forgiveness, and about the future. Michael had spent 2 years proving himself through his actions. He had rebuilt his life from scratch. He had patiently repaired not just the fence and the porch, but the broken trust between us. Perhaps it was time for me to take an action of my own. That Sunday, when Michael arrived, he was surprised to find I had set a small lunch on the table on the back porch. Not just tea, but sandwiches, a salad, and the apple pie I had made from my mother's recipe. "Mom," he started, unsure what to say. "Sit down, son. I think we have some things to talk about," I said, my voice gentle. It was the first real meal we had sat down to together in a very long time. We talked about his work, my pottery class, the books we were reading. The conversation was natural, no longer strained. After lunch, as we were clearing the dishes together, I said, "Michael, I need to go to Howard's office next Tuesday. I want to make some changes to my will. I'd like you to come with me." He froze, nearly dropping the plate in his hand. "Mom, you don't have to do that. I don't expect anything." "I know," I replied. "This isn't a handout, it's an acknowledgement. You've worked hard to earn back my respect, and you have." Tears welled up in his eyes. This time, they weren't tears of shame, but of gratitude. At Howard's office, with both of us present, I redrafted my will. The house, after I was gone, would not automatically go to Michael. It would be placed into a trust called the Vance Legacy Trust. Michael would be the trustee, with the right to live in the house for his entire life, but with no power to sell it or take out a mortgage against it. "This house is not an asset to be liquidated, Michael," I explained to him right there in the lawyer's office. "It is a legacy. It belongs to this family. One day, if you have a family of your own, this is where our grandchildren will grow up. You can modernize it, but you are never to erase its soul." A significant portion of my financial assets would be donated to the places that meant so much to me: the Ashland Public Library, where I had spent most of my working life, and a conservancy for heirloom roses in Oregon, in Richard's honor. The remainder, Michael would inherit, not as a gift, but as a responsibility to continue to protect and grow. Michael listened to it all in silence, his face showing complete understanding and acceptance. He was no longer the boy waiting for an inheritance. He was a man who understood the value of a legacy. As we walked out of the law office, a sense of relief washed over both of us. Everything was now in its right place, clear, fair, and full of meaning. On the way home, Michael said, "Thank you, Mom, not for what's in the will, but for giving me the chance to become someone Dad would be proud of." The end of the story isn't some big, dramatic event. It's a normal Sunday afternoon a few months later. I was sitting in Richard's armchair, reading a book. Michael was in the garden, not working, but just walking, looking at the flowers. He came inside, holding a single peace rose, the creamy one with the pink edges, the same kind Richard had given me as an apology. He handed the flower to me. "I think Dad would want you to have this," he said. I took the rose, its sweet fragrance filling the air. I looked at my son, the grown man standing before me, his eyes now clear and full of respect. The scar in my heart was still there, but it no longer ached. It was just a part of our story. I smiled. A real, warm smile, for the first time in a very long time. "Thank you, Michael. It's beautiful." The house was still mine, the garden was still mine, but now I didn't have to guard them alone anymore. I had a partner, a protector of the legacy, a son who had truly come home, not to take, but to cherish. The legacy of the roses, in the end, wasn't about property or money. It was about a love that had been tested by fire, had been broken, and then, slowly, had been mended, becoming stronger and more precious than ever before. And in the peace of that afternoon, I knew that this, right here, was the truest legacy of all. Thank you for listening to the whole story. If you are connected with it, please like, share, and subscribe. Also, drop a comment below with your thoughts or your own story. Let's keep the empathy and sharing going.